You have heard that it was said to those of ancient times, Matthew writes in chapter 5, "You shall not murder, and whoever murders shall be liable to judgment. But I say to you that if you are angry with a brother or sister, you will be liable to judgment. And if you insult a brother or sister, you will be liable to the council. And if you say, 'You fool,' you will be liable to the hell of fire. So when you are offering your gift at the altar, if you remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First, be reconciled to your brother or sister, and then come and offer your gift. Come to terms quickly with your accuser while you are on the way to court with him, or your accuser may hand you over to the judge, and the judge to the guard, and you will be thrown into prison. Truly, I tell you, you will never get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, 'You shall not commit adultery.' But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lust has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one of your members than for your whole body to go into hell. It was also said, 'Whoever divorces his wife, let him give her a certificate of divorce.' But I say to you that anyone who divorces his wife, except on the ground of unchastity, causes her to commit adultery, and whoever marries a divorced woman commits adultery." Well, good for you, Harry. You didn't shoot and kill anyone last week. But let me tell you, when in anger you swore at your brother on Tuesday and slammed down the phone, you snapped the do not murder command in two. And as for you, Lisa, last week you didn't actually sleep with a man not your husband. But let me tell you, on Wednesday you looked at your co-worker, John, and thought about it. So the do not commit adultery command is in shambles in your life. It's tough stuff, isn't it? From the outside looking in, it looks like Jesus is making God's law ridiculously hard to keep. It's not enough not to murder, but now we're not even to get angry. It's not enough not to commit adultery, but now we're not even to look sideways at anyone other than our spouse, lest we burn in hell. From the outside looking in, it looks like Jesus is turning God's law into something different, something much harder to keep. But here's the question. Is Jesus, in fact, changing the law into something new and different? I say no. Is he somehow improving God's law? In effect, replacing God's law with something better? Again, I say no. Actually, I believe Jesus is leading his audience closer to the heart of the law, closer to the heart of a divine law that already carries with it, albeit implicitly, the deepest of deep spiritual meanings. Most people would readily agree that actual deeds are always worse, always more harmful than any emotion we may feel or any secret fantasy we may have. Most would agree that murder carries worse consequences than anger, and the act of adultery worse penalties than sexual fantasy. So what is Jesus' point when he equates anger with murder and sexual fantasy with adultery? The point I think Jesus is trying to make is that the law of God was meant to foster human flourishing at every level, including the deepest levels of our hearts and minds. God wants us to respect one another, to love one another, and to see God's image residing deep within one another. Respect someone, and you're less likely to murder him. Love someone, and you may be less tempted to cheat on her. And let's face it, if you want respect yourself, then you have to give respect to others. It is, in my view, respect that undergirds the laws, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not commit adultery. Implicit in these laws is the deeper proverb, respect, you must give it to get it. As the author Scott Hazy maintains, human life is not supposed to be some giant game in which you scheme and scam to get ahead of everyone else. Contrary to what our hyper-competitive society often teaches, we're not to use people as pawns, as objects of our lust, as receptacles of our scorn, as targets of our desires, to brutalize, manipulate, and then discard. And one of my favorites, author and philosopher Martin Buber, argues that human beings are not to treat one another as its, but rather as thous. Imagine treating one another as a thou. Because none of us are mere bits of wood or scraps of rusty metal. None of us are objects or tools to be used as means to an end. Rather, each one of us is the subject of a sentence. Each one of us is a brilliant color in a rainbow. Each one of us, a divinely imaged thou, worthy of proper respect and honor. And as a thou, each one of us is to respect all the other thous with whom we come into contact. And of course, mutual respect between two people naturally translates to mutual respect between groups. even mutual respect between nations holding vastly different points of view. The American teacher, Stanley Dale, he experienced mutual respect in a way he'll never forget. Stanley took 29 people to Russia for 2 weeks in an effort to learn what the people there were really like. He writes, "While walking through a park in the industrial city of Kharkov, I spotted an old Russian veteran of World War II, easily identified by the medals and ribbons he still proudly displayed on his jacket. I went up to this old man sitting with his wife and said, 'Drushba i mir,' which means friendship and peace. The man, looking at me as if in disbelief, took the button we had made for the trip and said, 'Friendship,' in Russian, and showed a map of the U.S. and the USSR being held by loving hands. And he asked, 'Amerikansky?' I replied, 'Da, Amerikansky. Drushba i mir.' He clasped both my hands as if we were long-lost brothers and repeated again, 'Amerikansky.' This time there was recognition and love in his statement. For the next few minutes, he and his wife spoke in Russian as if I understood every word, and I spoke in English as if I knew he would understand. You know what? Neither one of us understood a word, but we certainly understood each other. We hugged and laughed and cried, all the while saying, 'Drushba i mir, Amerikansky, I love you, and I'm proud to be in your country. We do not want war. I love you.' After about 5 minutes, we said goodbye, and the 7 of us in our little group walked on. About 15 minutes after that, and some considerable distance on, the same old veteran caught up with us. He came up to me. He took off his Order of Lenin medal, probably his most prized possession, and pinned it to my jacket. He then kissed me on the cheek and then gave me one of the warmest, most loving hugs I've ever received. Then we both cried, looked into each other's eyes for the longest time, and said, 'Do svidaniya,' goodbye. Stanley Dale claims the above story is symbolic of their entire trip to Russia. There are now hundreds of school children from the 3 schools they visited who no longer think that Americans are people who want to nuke them. He writes, "Children of every age gave us flowers, cakes, buttons, paintings, dolls. Most importantly, they gave us their hearts and their open minds." Goes on to say, "More than once we were invited to be members of wedding parties. No biological family member could have been more warmly accepted. We hugged, kissed, danced, and drank champagne, schnapps, and vodka with the bride and groom, as well as with Mama, Papa, and the whole rest of the family." I could go on forever about our experiences, he writes, and yet there would be no way to convey to you exactly how we felt. How would you feel if you arrived at your hotel in Moscow and there was a telephone message waiting for you, written in Russian from Mikhail Gorbachev's office, saying he regretted he could not meet with you that weekend because he'd be out of town, but instead had arranged for your entire group to meet in a roundtable discussion with about a half dozen members of the Central Committee. We had a frank discussion about everything, Stanley writes. Each of us had our own experience, he says. But the collective experience bears one thing for certain. The only way we are ever going to ensure peace on this planet is to adopt the entire world as our family. We're going to have to hug them and kiss them and dance and play with them. And we're going to have to sit and talk and walk and cry with them. Because when we do, we'll be able to see that indeed everyone is beautiful. And we all complement each other so beautifully. And we would all be the poorer without one another. Respect. You must give it to get it. I am I, but you are thou. Never in it. Respect. It leads to love, and love leads to a recognition of the divine image within each of us. This, I think, is the stuff that Jesus is getting at. This is the stuff that lives within the spirit of God's law. Not only do not murder, but avoid getting angry. Not only do not commit adultery, but do not look lustfully after one another. Jesus is not changing God's law into something new, something different, nor is he improving upon it. Actually, Jesus is leading us to the very heart of God's law. The spirit of God's law, you might say. And that is that God wants us all to flourish. Now, most would agree that routinely we undercut the flourishing of our neighbors and of ourselves. Nevertheless, it is glorious to know, glorious, that the Creator God of the cosmos is on our side and really does want to see all manner of things go well in his good creation, in his good world of I's and thous. And praise be for that.